Have you ever felt that inexplicable heaviness, that silent burden you carry without knowing its name? The weight that grows heavier each time you allow someone to cross your boundaries. You see, there's a reason why some relationships drain your very soul, why certain patterns keep reappearing in your life like shadows that refuse to disappear when the light dims. Carl Jung understood this darkness better than most. He knew that what we tolerate, we secretly invite to remain. Tonight, I want to walk with you through the corridors of your own mind. If you're new here, this channel is a place where we explore the depths of the human psyche together, a voice in your darkness. Consider subscribing if you seek understanding beyond the surface of your existence. We'll journey together, one whisper at a time. The behaviors we tolerate shape the prison we inhabit. Jung recognized this painful truth. He saw how our compliance with what hurts us becomes the architecture of our suffering. Tonight, we'll explore 7 behaviors that Jung would warn us never to accept. 7 shadows that, when tolerated, begin to consume what makes us whole. These aren't just external behaviors from others, but the internal permissions we grant when we accept them. Let me be your guide through this darkness. Let me be that voice that speaks what your soul already knows. The first behavior Jung would never have us tolerate is perhaps the most insidious: the denial of your shadow. Have you ever met someone who projects a perfect image, who insists they harbor no darkness, no anger, no jealousy? Or perhaps you've done this yourself, claiming wholeness while fragments of you lie buried beneath consciousness. Jung observed that those who deny their shadow project it mercilessly onto others. The colleague who constantly accuses others of laziness, yet cannot see their own avoidance. The friend who condemns greed in everyone else while accumulating emotional debts they never intend to repay. Until you make the unconscious conscious, Jung warned, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. When we tolerate this denial in ourselves or in others, we consent to living in a world of illusions. We accept relationships built on half-truths, where the darkness, denied expression, seeps into every interaction like black ink through water. Ask yourself now, what aspects of yourself have you deemed unacceptable? What parts have you exiled to the shadows? The integration begins with this question, with this honest whisper in your own darkness. The second unacceptable behavior is the dismissal of dreams and symbols, the language through which your unconscious speaks. Jung discovered that our dreams are not random firings of a sleeping brain, but messages from the depths of our psyche. They are letters addressed to our conscious mind, written in the symbolic language of the soul. Those who mock this inner language, who treat dreams as meaningless or symbols as superstition, sever the bridge between consciousness and the vast unconscious. They tolerate a fragmented existence. I once worked with someone who dreamed repeatedly of drowning, yet laughed it off as just stress. Months later, they collapsed under the weight of unacknowledged emotional burdens they couldn't name. The water had been rising all along, speaking through dream language they refused to hear. Jung would tell us never to tolerate this dismissal, not in ourselves, not in the psychiatric and medical establishments that reduce the soul to chemistry, not in friends who mock your intuition. What dream have you dismissed recently? What recurring symbol appears in your life that you've refused to acknowledge? Listen closely. Your psyche is trying to tell you something essential about your journey. The third behavior Jung would warn against is the projection of personal responsibility, both in ourselves and those around us. Jung understood that the hardest psychological work is claiming ownership of our lives. It's far easier to blame circumstances, parents, society, or fate than to recognize our role in creating our reality. Notice how some people in your life perpetually cast themselves as victims, how they construct elaborate narratives where they bear no responsibility for their situation. Their boss is always unfair, their partner always misunderstands, the world is always against them. In tolerating this behavior, this abdication of personal power, we become unwitting accomplices in a narrative of helplessness. We validate a worldview where change is impossible. Free will, Jung reminded us, is the ability to do gladly that which I must do. Where in your life have you surrendered your agency? Where have you tolerated relationships that cast you as either perpetual rescuer or perpetual victim? These patterns persist only through your silent permission. If you're finding value in these reflections, consider becoming part of this community. Subscribe to join others walking this path of inner exploration. Each of us is a light in another's darkness. The fourth unacceptable behavior is perhaps the most painful, the betrayal of authenticity. Jung observed that many people would rather be complete in their falseness than incomplete in their truth. We craft personas, masks we present to the world, and gradually mistake them for our true self. Have you felt that dissonance, that subtle wrongness when you laugh at jokes that don't amuse you? When you nod in agreement with ideas that don't resonate? When you suppress your genuine reaction to preserve a harmony that isn't real? This betrayal is often subtle. It's the friend who changes opinions based on who's in the room. The partner who claims to want what you want, only for resentment to surface months later. The colleague whose words and actions exist in separate universes. Jung would tell us never to tolerate this disconnection, this sacrificing of truth on the altar of acceptance. The price of admission to belonging should never be the abandonment of your authentic self. The privilege of a lifetime, Jung wrote, is to become who you truly are. Consider now, where have you betrayed your authenticity? With whom do you wear the heaviest masks? The path to individuation, Jung's term for becoming whole, requires this painful recognition. The fifth behavior Jung would have us refuse is the inflation of ego, the dangerous over-identification with archetypal powers. When someone claims absolute certainty, when they speak as though they alone possess truth, when they cannot entertain the possibility of their wrongness, you're witnessing ego inflation. They have confused their limited perspective with universal truth. This inflation appears in the spiritual teacher who believes they've transcended human limitation, in the political zealot convinced their ideology alone can save humanity, in the partner who never questions their perceptions of shared experiences. Jung witnessed this inflation destroy individuals and societies alike. He saw how easily humans could become possessed by archetypal energies they couldn't contain, how identification with the hero, the savior, the wise one, could lead to devastation. Inflation, Jung cautioned, is a regression of consciousness into unconsciousness. It is a backflow of the waters. Where have you encountered this inflation? Where have you tolerated relationships with those who cannot admit doubt? Or perhaps more painfully, where have you yourself become infected with this certainty? The antidote lies in what Jung called the tension of opposites, holding contradictions without rushing to resolution. Wisdom begins not in answers, but in questions endured. The sixth behavior Jung would deem unacceptable is the neglect of soul, the modern tendency to live entirely on the surface of existence. In our world of endless distraction, many live decades without a single moment of true introspection. They fill every silence with noise, every space with activity, drowning out the whispers of their deeper nature. You've encountered them. People who cannot be alone, who fear stillness like death itself, who consume experiences without digesting them, who know many things but understand nothing, who can tell you what happened but never what it means. Jung recognized this as spiritual starvation, a famine of meaning in the midst of informational abundance. Modern man, he observed, cannot find his soul because he doesn't know where to look. When we tolerate relationships with people who mock depth, who ridicule contemplation, who treat meaning as mere sentiment, we validate a worldview that reduces human experience to consumption and production. Ask yourself, where have you neglected your own soul? Where have you accepted shallow engagement as a substitute for meaning? The voice that calls you to depth has never stopped speaking. It waits in the silence between your thoughts. The final behavior Jung would warn against is the refusal of the call to growth, the conscious rejection of the individuation process. Jung discovered that the psyche has its own teleology, its own purpose and direction. It calls us constantly toward greater wholeness, integration, and authenticity. But this call often requires suffering, uncertainty, and the death of outdated versions of ourselves. Many refuse this call. They choose comfortable stagnation over painful transformation. They build fortresses of habit and rationalization to avoid the necessary confrontation with their unlived life. This refusal appears in the person who remains in the job they hate because change is frightening, in the addict who knows their behavior is destructive but finds identity in the very pattern destroying them, in the friend who solicits advice they never intend to take. There is no coming to consciousness, Jung reminded us, without pain. When we tolerate this refusal in our relationships, when we support others in avoiding their necessary growth, we become accomplices in their diminishment. True compassion isn't helping someone avoid their path. It's walking beside them through the necessary fire. What call have you been refusing? What growth have you been postponing? The unlived life doesn't disappear when ignored. It transforms into symptoms, into depression, into the vague sense that you're betraying something essential. These 7 behaviors, the denial of shadow, dismissal of dreams, projection of responsibility, betrayal of authenticity, inflation of ego, neglect of soul, and refusal of growth, form the architecture of our suffering when tolerated. Jung understood something profound about human nature. What we accept, we reinforce. What we tolerate, we invite to remain. The boundaries we fail to establish become the limitations we live within. Yet there is profound hope in this recognition. For if our tolerance shapes our reality, our conscious choices can reshape it. The prison of our suffering is, in many ways, maintained by our own permission. Tonight, as these words find you in your own darkness, I invite you to consider what you've been accepting that deserves your rejection. What patterns have persisted through your silent consent? What relationships continue through your unwillingness to demand more? If this exploration has resonated with you, become part of this community. Subscribe to continue this journey of understanding together. Each video is another lantern in the darkness we all navigate. Remember Jung's most profound insight. The goal of psychological development isn't happiness, it's wholeness. And wholeness requires the courage to say no to what diminishes us, even when that no must be spoken to parts of ourselves. I'll be here in the darkness whenever you need a voice to remind you of what your soul already knows.